Hello and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. I'm Aaron Porras here with ILTV's Morning Brief. Responding to the accusations against him Tuesday night, Prime Minister Netanyahu says we need to pressure the Israeli justice system and avert the left's attempted coup. Netanyahu is facing charges of fraud, breach of trust, and bribery across 3 different criminal probes, and both he and his supporters argue not only that he's innocent, but that these particular charges have never been issued against anyone, let alone against a sitting prime minister. But now, though, just 24 hours after addressing thousands of his supporters at the Tel Aviv Museum, Netanyahu is calling for calm. In a video posted to social media, the prime minister is still thanking his base and denouncing the media, but walking back on the tone of some earlier rhetoric, Netanyahu says that it's important to act responsibly, within the law, without overzealousness, and without violence. Meanwhile, with less than 2 weeks left to form a government and avoid landmark third elections, Knesset Speaker and Likud MK Yuli Edelstein is inviting negotiators from rival party Blue and White under Chairman Benny Gantz to meet. The 120 lawmakers in Israel's parliament must get at least 61 Knesset members to recommend a prime minister in order to form a coalition. But with chances being low, Edelstein calls on the Likud and the Blue and White leaders to choose between leadership and cowardice, between the will of the public and a tremendous crisis of trust. Still, it looks like Edelstein's calls are in vain, as Blue and White officials have already responded, saying they're willing to sit with the Likud and that they're even willing to accept a rotation agreement for the Prime Minister's office, provided that Gantz goes first. But they will not sit in a government with Netanyahu before he's acquitted of charges, which is highly unlikely to happen before the deadline. In a statement released by the IDF Thursday morning, the military is confirming overnight operations in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, in which they demolished 4 homes belonging to the Palestinians connected to the murder of 18-year-old yeshiva student Dvir Sorek. Sorek was stabbed to death in August 2019 while on the way to a religious seminary where he studied, and cousins Nasir and Qasem Asafra were later charged with the murder, while 3 others have been indicted in connection. The IDF sees the practice of terrorist home demolitions as a deterrent to future terrorist attacks, while the Palestinians see it as an ineffective collective punishment. Either way, Defense Minister Bennett says that a heavy price must be exacted against all who raise a hand against Israeli citizens. And that's why now, in addition to home demolitions, Bennett has issued a new policy directive. The IDF will no longer release the bodies of terrorists for burial, regardless of which terror group they belong to, and exceptions will only be made at the Defense Minister's discretion. Finally, the directive is expected to be introduced at the next Security Cabinet meeting as part of a larger policy on deterrence. And this also reportedly follows a request made by Prime Minister Netanyahu 10 days ago after meeting with the families of Hadar Golden and Oron Shaul, 2 Israeli soldiers whose remains have been held hostage by Hamas in Gaza for over 5 years' time. Aside from arguing that it'll be an eyesore, a group of Israeli archaeologists, architects, and researchers are all now pleading with the Israeli high courts to scrap plans to construct a cable car line to the Western Wall in Jerusalem's Old City. The plan is supposed to attract tourism and is expected to carry up to 3,000 people per hour during peak traffic, alleviating congestion issues and pollution around the capital. And it's already been green-lighted by the Tourism Ministry, the Finance Ministry, and the Ministries of Planning and Housing. But signatories of the petition, which include Israel Prize winners and former Antiquities Authority officials, say the Transportation Ministry wasn't even consulted, and they argue that it's as if the Tourism Ministry decided to set up a medical tourism hospital without consulting the Health Ministry in the process. The petition also says that projections of the visual impact of the cable cars are not realistic, and that even if everything else was in line, the interim government cannot sign off on such a massive project anyway. Then on the sidelines, many other researchers, preservation experts, and tour guides also argue that the plan is politically irresponsible, will spoil the unique views of the old city, and will fail to actually solve any problems with traffic and the like. The Tourism Ministry and Jerusalem Mayor Moshe Leon, on the other hand, still strongly support the initiative, boasting how the whole 1 mile or 1.5 kilometer long track will take just 5 minutes or less to travel, while stopping at most of the major tourism spots in the city. It's been a month now since the International Judo Federation barred Iranian-based athletes from competing over their continued refusal to face off against Israeli opponents. And the IJF says that the ban is indefinite, ending only when the regime in Tehran ends its long-running boycott against the Jewish state. But now you might remember that certain Iranian athletes are already braving the consequences of opposing their home state's policy. Saeed Molaei, for example, fled Iran for Germany after he was forced to intentionally lose the World Championship match in Tokyo against Israeli judoka Sagi Muki. And now that he's been granted refugee status, he says that he's free to concentrate fully on judo as part of the new international refugee team. Taking things one step further, though, is 23-year-old Mohammad Rashnonezad, who similarly fled his native Iran over their boycott policy. And Rashnonezad has also recently been granted refugee status in Holland, where he's been living for the past 2 years and competing under the refugee flag. In fact, he was one of only 2 refugee athletes to medal in the Budapest Grand Prix, earning bronze. And now he's finally setting his sights on his first Israeli matchups, as the Tel Aviv Grand Prix reports that Rashnonezad has officially registered for the January competition. He'll be competing in the under 60 kilogram weight class, and we wish him the best of luck. That's all for now, but for more news from Israel, remember to like ILTV on Facebook and on Instagram, and to subscribe to us on YouTube. I'm Aaron Porras, and see you later with our main daily broadcast from Israel at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.